Hello friends, welcome to the HFY Ode, where we bring you new science fiction stories, a new world, a new adventure. And yes, there is no robotic or AI voices here, only real human voices with real human touch. So let's start this journey, and please subscribe my channel if you like the stories and press the bell icon for the latest updates. Let's have a story. Okay.
The Vethkai interstellar dominion had been cataloguing species for 4,000 years before they ever pointed a deep-range sensor at the third planet of an unremarkable yellow star in the Orion Spur. They were thorough, the Vethkai, meticulous. They documented everything: atmospheric composition, dominant biology, technological tier, cultural aggression index, and what their xenopsychology division called the submission threshold. The point at which a species, confronted with overwhelming superior force, would stop fighting and begin calculating how to survive. Every species had one. The Ryathi submitted at first orbital bombardment. The Cenovar at first city strike. The tall, fragile Ulan, who had actually achieved interstellar travel, submitted the moment Vethkai dreadnoughts entered their home system, and without a single shot fired. The submission threshold was, the Dominion believed, a universal law of sapient life. Like thermodynamics, like gravity. You couldn't argue with it, you just measured it, catalogued it, and used it. Senior Assessor Mevrak Dostal was the one assigned to the human file. She was not young. 3 decades in the Assessor Corps had given her the particular kind of fatigue that comes not from overwork, but from never being surprised. She reviewed the human entry the way she reviewed all of them, from her chair, on her third cup of Veleth bark tea, with the low hum of the cataloguing station filling the silence around her. Terran designation: human, Homo sapiens. Sol 3. Technological tier: early spacefaring. Unified planetary governance: partial. Internal warfare: significant and ongoing. And cultural aggression index: elevated but self-directed. Primary observed behaviors: resource competition, tribalism, remarkable biological adaptability, extremely high pain tolerance relative to body mass. That last entry had been flagged by a junior assessor 2 years prior. Maverick had noted it, filed it under biological curiosity, and moved on. She almost wrote submission threshold, moderate, and closed the file. Almost. Something in the data made her pause. She wasn't sure what, exactly. A collection of small things that shouldn't have added up to anything but somehow did. The humans had been hit by mass extinction events, 5 of them, geological record confirmed, and had not merely survived, but proliferated after each one. They had internal wars that, by Vethkai standards, were catastrophically destructive. And yet their population numbers climbed regardless, like a weed that grows faster when you pull it. Their medicine was primitive, their interstellar capability was nil, and yet they had somehow, against every statistical probability, survived on a planet that wanted to kill them. They are rough-edged, she wrote in the margin of her report. Possibly interesting, not a threat. She closed the file. 2 years later, the Vethkai expansion fleet arrived at the edge of the Sol system, and the file got a lot thicker. Commander Aravel of the 3rd Expansion Arm was not a cruel officer by Vethkai standards. She was efficient. There is a difference, though it is a thin one, and she had spent enough time in the Corps that she no longer thought about where the line was. The protocol was simple, established, proven on 47 species across 4 millennia. First, approach with full fleet visibility. Let them see the ships. Let the mathematics of the situation do the diplomatic work. Second, transmit the Dominion Standard Assimilation offer. Resources, territory, and sovereignty would be surrendered. In exchange, the species would be classified as a client race, protected, taxed, and permitted to continue existing under Dominion administration. The Vethkai were not wasteful. Extinction was only deployed when a species proved incapable of economic utility or administrative compliance. Third, wait for the submission signal. It always came. The fleet dropped out of transit at the edge of the heliosphere. 214 warships, a number chosen not for tactical necessity, but for visual effect. The math of annihilation, and written in hull plating and weapons array, hanging in the dark, like a sentence that didn't need a verb. Aravel transmitted the offer. Then she waited. The response came 11 hours later, and it was not what the Dominion Standard Protocol anticipated. It was a woman's voice. The translation matrix took 4 seconds to render it, and when it did, Aravel read the transcript 3 times because she assumed there had been an error. This is Secretary General Indira Ose of the United Earth Council. We've received your transmission. We've reviewed your terms. Our answer is no. We will not be surrendering our territory, our resources, or our sovereignty. If you approach Earth, we will defend it. If you harm our people, we will remember. I hope for both our sakes that this conversation goes no further than this channel. But that choice is yours. Aravel sat with the transcript for a long time. Then she transmitted it to Assessor Mevrak Dostal, who read it at her desk with her 4th cup of Valeth tea and felt, for the first time in 3 decades, surprised. She wrote one word in the margin. Oh, the thing about the Vethkai Dominion, the thing that would matter later, was that they never actually expected to lose. Not because they were arrogant, though they were that too, but because in 4,000 years of expansion, across 47 species, across hundreds of worlds and systems and civilizations, they never had. The submission threshold was real. They had tested it empirically over and over in the cold laboratory of other species Terra, and it had never failed. So when the first Vethkai landing parties touched down on Ganymede, a testing probe, a small force, just to demonstrate capability, and were met not with evacuation or surrender signals, but with a coordinated, pre-positioned military ambush, Aravel assumed it was a local anomaly. A pride response, her tactical advisor told her. Some cultures require a symbolic resistance before submission. It costs us nothing to absorb it. Aravel agreed. She sent a larger force. The larger force didn't come back. Colonel Yusuf Adeyemi Hargreaves had been waiting on Ganymede for 6 weeks. 6 weeks in a pressurized installation that smelled permanently of recycled air and machine oil and the specific kind of stress that settles into a room when the people inside it know they are outgunned and have decided to fight anyway. His unit was 241 soldiers from 9 different countries, which meant that in the early days there had been some friction, language, protocol, old military habits grinding against new ones. But 6 weeks in a box together waiting to die does a remarkable thing to friction. It sands it down to nothing. What was left was something Yusuf had no word for in English, though he'd heard it called different things in different languages by different soldiers. The Yoruba word his grandmother had used, ashose, came closest. The binding that forms under pressure. They had 4 artillery pieces repurposed from asteroid mining rigs. They had small arms. They had 241 people who had said their goodbyes before deploying, who had looked at the odds and then shown up anyway. Which is not bravery exactly. Bravery suggests you don't understand the math, but something that lives past bravery on the map of human behavior, in the territory that has no comfortable name. When the second Vethkai force landed, they were bigger, more organized, and came equipped with the same technology that had pacified the Senevar homeworld in 11 minutes. Yusuf's people hit them from 4 directions simultaneously. The Vethkai didn't have a word for ambush exactly. Their tactical lexicon had a term for strategic misdirection and one for feigned retreat, but not for the particular human behavior of digging into a position you know you cannot hold, for the sole purpose of making the enemy pay so dearly for every step that taking the next step becomes a calculation they can no longer afford. Attrition. It's one of humanity's oldest words, one of their oldest arts. The battle for Ganymede lasted 19 days. The Vethkai won it. They paid for it with 6,000 dead, which was more casualties than the entire previous 47 species combined had inflicted upon Dominion forces. Aravel looked at the casualty numbers and felt something cold move through her chest, something she hadn't felt in 30 years of command. She flagged the file and called Assessor Mevrak. "Tell me everything you know about them," she said. Mevrak thought about the margin note she'd written 2 years ago, the one that said, "Not a threat." She didn't mention it. "I'll send you everything," she said instead. "But, Commander, I want to flag something, their submission threshold." She paused. "I don't have a number for it. I've been looking at the data since your first transmission, and I cannot find it. Every species we've catalogued has a point where they calculate the cost of continued resistance versus the cost of surrender, and they stop. I can't find that inflection point in the human record." Silence on the line. "Every species has it," Aravel said. "Yes." Mevrak set down her tea. "That's what concerns me. The Council of Seven, the Vethkai governing body, 7 senior commanders representing the 7 expansion arms of the Dominion, met in emergency session 4 months after the first landing. Ganymede had fallen. Mars orbit had not. 3 separate fleet engagements near Jupiter had gone poorly in ways the tactical models couldn't fully explain. The humans were doing something the models didn't have a category for. They were getting better. Not just adapting, not just learning the Vethkai weapons signatures and compensating. They were innovating in real time, mid-battle, in ways that suggested a relationship with improvisation that the Vethkai, disciplined, methodical, 4,000-year-old Vethkai, genuinely could not simulate. Commander Reth Soval, First Arm, set a datapad on the table. "I have the updated projections. If we commit full force, everything, every ship in the Dominion, we take the Sol system in approximately 4 years, and at a cost of between 8 and 12 million Vethkai casualties." Silence in the chamber. "That's more than," Commander Veldos began. "More than all casualties from all expansion operations since the Dominion was founded." "Yes." Reth Soval's voice was flat. Not dramatic, just flat. In the way numbers are flat when they're too large for drama to touch them. And that assumes the humans don't continue improving their tactics, which, based on the last 4 months, is not an assumption I'm willing to make. Another silence. Longer. "We have another option," said Commander Yel Torath, who commanded the Dominion's Strategic Infrastructure Division. Everyone looked at her. "The Keth Protocol," she said. The room got very quiet. The Keth Protocol was named for a species catalogued 800 years ago, a burrowing colonial organism on a world that had no name anymore, only a coordinates designation. The Ryathi had named them once in their own tongue, but the Ryathi were client races now, and their old languages were administrative records. The Keth had refused assimilation twice. They had been difficult to root out because of their tunnel networks, their distributed biology, their tenacity, a word the Dominion had learned from their records of human languages, because the Vethkai didn't have an exact equivalent. The Keth Protocol meant you didn't try to defeat an enemy. You removed the conditions that allowed them to exist. You didn't fight a species. You ended it. Yel Torath laid out the mechanics. Biological agents seeded through the upper atmosphere, calibrated to the human genome. Deployment method: 6 vessels, automated, requiring no crew exposure to the surface. Timeline: 14 months for full effect. Clean, efficient. No more 6,000 casualty battles over frozen moons. Aravel, sitting at the far end of the table, looked at the proposal for a long time. She thought about Secretary General Osei's voice on the comm, the steadiness in it. "If you harm our people, we will remember." "They'll know it's coming," Aravel said. "They don't have the capability to stop it," Yel Torath replied. "They'll know it's coming," Aravel said again, differently this time, not as an objection, as a warning she couldn't fully articulate. "And they have 14 months. To do what?" Reth Soval asked. "They cannot stop 6 automated vessels. They have no interstellar capability. They cannot come to us. They can only... We don't know what they can do," Mavrak Dostal said from her seat along the wall, where she'd been invited as a consultant and had, until this moment, said nothing. That is specifically what I've been trying to communicate for 6 months. We do not have a submission threshold on record for this species. We do not know their ceiling. We have been, across every engagement, fighting a version of them that is improvising under constraint. We have never seen them unconstrained. The council looked at her. She looked back. I'm not saying don't do it, she said carefully. I'm saying do not assume that doing it ends the problem. Yel Torath straightened her datapad. They're one planet, one species, one solar system. The delivery vessels are automated. There is no scenario. The Keth had tunnels, Mavrak said. We didn't know about the tunnels until we were in them. She paused. Humans have been building tunnels for 10,000 years. Some of them go very deep. The vote was 5-2. The Keth protocol was approved. The delivery vessels were prepped. And on Earth, the through channels the Dominion didn't know existed, because the humans had quietly, carefully, over 4 months of losing battles and buying time, done exactly what every intelligence service on the planet had been designed to do. Secretary General Indira Osei received a notification on a secure channel. She read it. She set it down. She picked up a different comm line. Not the United Council, not the military. She called a meeting of 12 people whose names do not appear in any public record, whose division has no official designation, and whose operating budget has been classified at the highest level of every major government on Earth since the late 20th century. A budget that had, in the 4 months since Vethkai ships first appeared at the edge of the solar system, has been increased by a factor that even the finance ministers who approved it had gone quiet about. They voted, she said when they were assembled. 12 faces. 12 different expressions of the same thing. How long? Asked the woman at the end of the table, whose name was Dr. Valentina Chukwu Reyes, whose title was Director of Asymmetric Response, and who had not slept more than 4 hours at a stretch in 3 months. 14 months, Osei said. Valentina looked at her team. Then we have 14 months, she said, to introduce the Vethkai Dominion to a version of us they've never met. She pulled up a file on her screen. It was very large. It had many subfolders. The cover designation, in plain text at the top of the document, read, Operation. Remembered animal. Outside the window, the sun was setting over Geneva. It looked the same as it always had. Orange and gold and ordinary and heartbreaking in the way that beautiful things are heartbreaking when you know they are under threat. Valentina didn't look at it. She opened the first subfolder. There was work to do. 14 months were not quiet. This is worth saying plainly because the Vethkai monitoring stations, positioned at the edge of the Sol system, watching the inner planets for signs of the expected collapse, reported something that confused their analysts deeply. The humans did not go still. They did not go dark. They did not begin the long, species-wide psychological process that Dominion's xenopsychologists called grief dissolution. The behavioral pattern in which a doomed species gradually, incrementally stops. Stops building, stops innovating, stops the furious spinning of a civilization that has run out of runway. The humans sped up. This was the first data point that went into Mavrak Dostal's new file. The file she'd started keeping privately on a personal data drive, in defiance of no particular regulation, but with the feeling that she was documenting something she didn't fully understand yet. She labeled it, in a small private irony, Curiosities. The energy output from Earth's surface increased by 40% in the first 3 months. Not from cities, from deep underground. The seismic monitoring arrays picked up sustained vibration patterns consistent with construction. At depths the Vethkai hadn't thought relevant to survey. Industrial-scale manufacturing output from the orbital stations tripled, then quintupled, and the product signatures were wrong. Not the resource processing or habitat construction the analysts expected, but something their systems couldn't resolve into a known category. They were building something. at a pace that shouldn't have been possible for a species operating on their technological tier. "What is that?" Commander Aravel asked her intelligence chief, pointing at a spectral analysis of the orbital manufacturing output. The intelligence chief, a methodical officer named Fendros, who had spent 20 years identifying threat signatures across the Dominion's expansion frontier, looked at the analysis for a long moment. "I don't know," he said. Aravel looked at him. In 20 years, she had never heard Fendros say those three words. "Probability assessment?" she asked. "The output profile is consistent with, and I want to be precise about this, with approximately 6 different things simultaneously, none of which they should have the capability to produce." He set the analysis down. "They're doing something I cannot categorize, Commander. And whatever it is, they've been doing it at scale for 3 months, which means they started it within weeks of the Council vote. They couldn't have known about the vote." Fendros was quiet. "Fendros? They couldn't have known about the vote through any channel we're aware of," he said carefully. Dr. Valentina Chukwu-Reyes had not, in her professional life, ever tried to build a bioweapon delivery interception system, a planetary immune protocol, and a species preservation fleet simultaneously in 14 months, on a budget that was technically unlimited but practically constrained by the fact that the manufacturing infrastructure required to build the things she needed had to be constructed alongside the things themselves. She'd also never tried to do any of those things while managing a team of 900 people drawn from 40 different national programs, whose security clearances had been fast-tracked under emergency authorization, and several of whom had deeply incompatible views on methodology, organizational structure, and whether coffee or tea was the appropriate beverage for a 16-hour shift. The coffee versus tea argument had actually come to a head in month 3. She had resolved it by placing both machines on opposite sides of the break room and declaring the center of the room a demilitarized zone. The team had laughed. It had been, she realized later, the first time any of them had laughed in weeks, and she had watched it move through the room like something physical, like oxygen. She'd filed that observation away. It would become relevant. The core of Operation Remembered Animal had 3 components. The first was the Aegis Protocol, a biological countermeasure program run out of a deep facility in the Swiss Alps, tasked with identifying, isolating, and neutralizing the Vethkai atmospheric agent before deployment. The team was 63 people. Their lead was a Congolese virologist named Dr. Amara Mbeki Santos, who had previously spent 20 years developing pan-coronavirus vaccines and who, upon being briefed on the specific mechanics of the Vethkai agent, had looked at the data for 48 hours without sleeping, and then said, and with the particular calm of someone who has decided panic is not a productive use of energy, "I can work with this." She worked with it for 11 months. The second component was the ARC initiative, the construction, in secret, of 17 deep space vessels, not warships, though they were armed, designed to carry human genetic material, cultural archives, educational databases, and, critically, 12,000 human volunteers on a trajectory that would take them beyond the Vethkai's current expansion boundary. The logic was cold and simple. If the worst happened, humanity would not end here. It would wake up somewhere, small and without resources, and very, very far from home. The volunteer selection process was handled by a retired professor of ethics from Lagos named Dr. Kweku Annan-Bar, who had agreed to the role on the condition that the selection criteria be transparent to the volunteers themselves. The council had argued against the transparency. Valentina had overruled them. "They deserve to know what they're signing up for," she said. "They'll be terrified," said the council representative. "Yes," said Valentina, "and they'll come anyway. That's the point. 12,000 volunteers, 47,000 applicants. The third component, the one that Valentina spent the most time on, that she argued for most fiercely in the briefings where people kept telling her it was impractical or impossible or reckless, was the one she called, privately, the teeth. Not a defense, not an evacuation, not a countermeasure, a response. The Vethkai did not, as a civilization, have a robust tradition of reconsidering decisions once made. This was not a character flaw exactly, but a structural one. The Council of Seven operated on the principle that the decision-making process was where debate lived, and the post-decision period was where execution lived, and mixing the two produced the kind of institutional paralysis that had, historically, destroyed empires. This principle had served them well for 4,000 years. It was serving them less well now, because Mevrak Dostal was, by month 10, producing reports that were making the Council very uncomfortable. The reports were precise, sourced, conservatively written, and deeply alarming. They documented the energy output anomalies, the underground construction signatures, the orbital manufacturing profile that Fendros couldn't categorize, the behavioral patterns of a species that had been told, functionally, that it had 14 months to live, and had responded by building things in the dark at a pace that violated everything the Dominion's development models predicted was possible. She included, in the 10th month report, a section she labelled simply, Observed Behaviour Under Terminal Pressure. She wrote, in the recorded history of the 47 species contacted by the Dominion, terminal pressure, defined as the confirmed, credible, near certain destruction of the species, produces universally one of two behavioural responses, compliance or dissolution. The subject species is producing a third response for which I do not have a name in our language. They are not complying. They are not dissolving. The they are, the best translation I can construct from their own historical records, they are preparing, with the specific, concentrated, systematic focus of an entity that does not believe the story is over. She submitted the report. The Council filed it under assessor concerns and continued the deployment schedule. Month 12. Dr. Amara Mbeki Santos called Valentina at 3 in the morning. I have it, she said. Valentina was awake, had been awake, was always awake at 3 in the morning these days. You're sure? It took me 11 months and I burned through 4 lab teams and I haven't seen my children in 8 weeks, Amara said, with the flat precision of someone stating coordinates rather than grievances. But yes, I'm sure, the countermeasure works. Full atmospheric deployment from the existing satellite network. 48 hours for planetary coverage. Valentina closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them and started making calls. The 6 automated delivery vessels launched from the Vethkai fleet on schedule on the 14th month on a Tuesday. Not that the Vethkai knew it was Tuesday, or that Tuesday had any particular significance, but Mevrak Dostal would later note it in her records because she had learned, by then, to pay attention to the details humans thought were worth naming. Aravel watched the launch from the bridge of her flagship. It was clean, efficient. The vessels were small, uncrewed, nearly undetectable to the monitoring systems she knew the humans had. They would enter the atmosphere at 6 dispersed points across the globe, and the agent would be airborne within hours. And in 14 months, this file would be closed. She told herself she felt nothing about this. She mostly succeeded. The vessels crossed the heliopause, crossed the outer solar system, approached Earth on the programmed trajectory, tiny and cold and carrying the end of something. The first vessel detonated before it reached the moon. Not a weapons hit. Something else. A signal-triggered internal cascade, as if something in its guidance system had been remotely convinced that it had already arrived and should deploy. The second was intercepted by something the Vethkai sensor arrays couldn't classify. A platform that hadn't been there 3 months ago, that appeared on their screens briefly and then vanished like a piece of space that had briefly decided to be a machine. The third, fourth, and fifth were taken by variations of the same method, each one different enough from the last that there was no common countermeasure to deploy. The sixth made it to low Earth orbit. It deployed. For approximately 40 seconds, the Vethkai monitoring stations registered the atmospheric agent beginning to spread over the northern hemisphere, and Aravel held very still, and the bridge was very quiet. Then the satellite network fired. 48 hours later, Dr. Amara Mbeki Santos sent a single message to the secure channel. It said, "Clean." The Council of Seven met in emergency session for the second time in 14 months. The failure of the Keth Protocol was, there was no gentler word for it, unprecedented. In 800 years of Dominion history, the protocol had never been deployed against a species that had survived it. And the theological and institutional implications of this were being processed by people much further up the Dominion hierarchy than the Council, in halls and chambers Mevrak Dostal didn't have access to. But Mevrak was not thinking about theology. She was looking at the new data from the outer system monitoring arrays. The data that had come in while the Council was distracted by the protocol failure. The data that Fendros had routed to her private terminal with a notation that said simply, "You need to see this." The Ark vessels, the 17 ships the humans had been building in secret for 14 months, were not on the trajectory she'd expected. They were not fleeing the solar system on a deep space preservation heading. They were on an intercept heading, with the Vethkai fleet, 17 ships. By the Dominion's assessment, a lightly armed, small by fleet standards, almost laughably outgunned. There was no military logic to it. No scenario in which 17 ships of that specification represented a meaningful threat to a fleet of 214 warships. And yet, she thought about the tunnel systems, the things she'd said in the council chamber. We didn't know about the tunnels until we were in them. She thought about what Fendros had said, something I cannot categorize. She thought about the 14 months and what the humans had built in them, and the fact that she still, even now, did not fully know what the orbital manufacturing output had been producing. She thought about Secretary General Osei's voice. "If you harm our people, we will remember." She was already reaching for her comm when Aravel's channel came alive. Mevrak. A pause. The sound of a bridge doing what bridges do when something unexpected appears on the tactical screen. "What are those ships?" Mevrak looked at the trajectory again, at the vectors, at the manufacturing profile she'd spent 14 months trying to categorize. "I think," she said slowly, "that those are the teeth." Silence on the line. "I think," she said, "that we should listen to what they say before we decide what to do next." Another silence. Longer. "They're hailing us," said someone on Aravel's bridge, in the background, voice careful and strange. And for the first time in 4,000 years of expansion, a Vethkai commander hesitated. She hesitated. And the channel opened. The voice that came through the channel was not Secretary General Osei's. It was a man's voice. Calm. Unhurried. The kind of calm that isn't the absence of feeling, but its opposite. The kind that forms when feeling has been compressed down into something load-bearing. This is Fleet Admiral Marcus Idowu Strauss, commanding the UEF Vanguard. You have 214 ships. We have 17. I want to acknowledge that. I want you to understand that we know the math. On the bridge of the Vethkai flagship, no one moved. I also want you to understand something else. Something that I think you may have missed in your 4,000 years of expansion and your 47 species and your Keth protocol and your submission thresholds and all the rest of it. A pause. Not for effect. It didn't feel like a performance. It felt like a man making sure his words were the right ones. You tried to end us. You sent 6 ships to kill every human being on Earth while we couldn't touch you. While we had no way to respond, no interstellar reach, nothing. You looked at the math and you decided we were a problem to be solved rather than a people to be reckoned with. Another pause. We're still here? Aravel was looking at the tactical display. The 17 ships had held position since the hail opened. No aggressive maneuver, no weapons hot, just 17 points of light hanging in the dark between her fleet and the sun of a species that should not still exist. Her tactical officer spoke quietly. "Commander, the profile on those vessels. I see it. The manufacturing output we couldn't categorize. I see it." She'd seen it the moment the ships resolved on the display. The thing Fendros hadn't been able to classify. The thing Mevrak had been trying to name for 14 months. The thing built in secret in orbital facilities running at 5 times their rated capacity. She'd seen it. She understood it. And the specific quality of cold that moved through her chest in that moment was different from the cold she'd felt looking at the Ganymede casualties. That had been operational. This was something older, something that lived further down. The 17 ships were not armed the way ships were armed. They were armed the way a civilization is armed when it has decided, collectively, in full understanding of the cost, that there is something it will not allow to happen to it. Dr. Valentina Chukwu-Reyes was watching the feed from the bridge of the flagship Remembered Animal on a screen in her office in Geneva. She was drinking coffee. The coffee versus tea debate felt like it had happened in a different life, which in some ways it had. She watched Admiral Idowu Strauss stand at the comm station with his hands clasped behind his back, and she thought about the 47,000 people who had applied for 12,000 spots on vessels designed for a mission that had, in the end, become something different. She thought about Dr. Mbeki Santos and her 8 weeks away from her children. She thought about the 241 soldiers on Ganymede who had dug in and made themselves expensive. She thought about the fact that the Vethkai had voted 5-2. 2 members of the council had voted against. She had thought about those 2 votes for a long time, in the 14 months. They were, she believed, important. On the bridge of the Vethkai flagship, a Mevrak Dostal had been patched in through Aravel's comm. She was still at her desk. The file on her screen was very large now. The Curiosities folder had 67 subfiles. She was looking at a document she'd pulled up 3 hours ago, a translation from a human archive, a historical record from a period called the Second World War, which was one of the entries that had given her pause when she first reviewed the human file, because the scale of violence was remarkable even by galactic standards. But what was more remarkable was the 8 years after it in which the nations that had fought the war built something called the United Nations and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a document that began with the words, "All human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights." You're a species that could do that kind of violence to itself, and then write that document. She had been trying to understand that for 2 years. She thought she might be beginning to. "We have a proposal," Admiral Idowu Strauss said, through the open channel, to the fleet of 214 ships that could unmake everything he was. Not surrender, not submission. We don't have a submission threshold. I think your assessors may have noted that. On the flagship bridge, Aravel watched Mevrak's face on the side screen. The assessor's expression was something she'd never seen on a Vethkai face before. She didn't have a word for it. It was, though she didn't know this yet, wonder. "We have a proposal for contact, for relationship, for whatever comes after the part where you tried to kill us and we survived." But because here's the thing about humans that you've been measuring wrong from the start. A pause. We're not at our most dangerous when we're winning. We're at our most dangerous when we've lost everything except the decision about who we want to be when this is over. The channel was very quiet. You have 214 ships. We have 17. You can destroy us right now, and maybe that math still works in your favor. But I want to tell you something that I believe is true, that I think your assessors are beginning to understand. He let that sentence sit for a moment. You cannot find our ceiling. You've been fighting us for over a year, and you cannot find the top of us. You try to end us in the night while we're sleeping, and we build the teeth to answer you in 14 months. You send your best forces to a frozen moon, and 200 soldiers make you pay 6,000 to take it. You have 4,000 years of expansion and 47 species in your records, and not one of them told you what you're going to learn right now. The bridge, the fleet, the dark between the ships and the sun. We don't stop. 3 things happened in the next hour. The first, Aravel sent a fleet-wide signal standing down from combat readiness. It was the first time in her command career she had issued that order in the presence of a declared hostile. She issued it with a steadiness she did not entirely feel, because command requires performing certainty even when certainty has taken the day off. The second, Mevrak Dostal, sent a message to the Council of Seven. Not a report, not a brief. A message, direct and personal. Marked with the designation she had never in 30 years used, urgent. Policy reconsideration. It said, in its entirety, I have found the variable we've been missing. It is not tactical. It is not technological. We have been measuring the wrong thing for 47 species. The submission threshold is real for all species, except this one, because all other species calculate survival as a function of the present. Humans calculate it as a function of the future. They are willing to pay costs in the present that no living member of their species will benefit from, because they are building something they call what comes next. They are the only species we have encountered that regularly chooses to suffer for people who do not yet exist. This is not irrationality. I believe it is the most dangerous form of rationality we have ever catalogued. We should talk to them. We should do this carefully, respectfully, and we should understand that we are not speaking to a species. We are speaking to a species' idea of itself. Those are not the same thing. The idea does not die. The third, Secretary-General Indira Osei, sitting in a conference room in Geneva with Dr. Valentina Chukwu-Reyes and 12 people whose names don't appear in public records, received the Vethkai fleet's response to the hail. It was 4 words. We are prepared to listen. Osei read it twice. Well, she said. Valentina poured 2 cups of coffee, set one in front of the Secretary-General, kept one for herself. Well, she agreed. The negotiations lasted 8 months. This is not the place to detail them. They were complicated, so contentious, and occasionally terrifying, and they involved 7 translators, 4 diplomatic teams, 1 incident that almost ended everything, and which is classified at a level that will not be reviewed for 50 years, and 1 night when Mevrak Dostal and Dr. Valentina Chukwu-Reyes sat on opposite sides of a comm channel for 4 hours just talking, which had not been scheduled and which both of them would, when asked, deny had been important, and both would be lying. What matters is the document that emerged from them. Not a client race designation, not a submission framework, not a Dominion assimilation protocol, a contact treaty, the first of its kind in 4,000 years of Vethkai history. It recognized human sovereignty. It established mutual observation protocols. It designated a buffer zone around the Sol system. It included, at humanity's insistence and after 3 weeks of Vethkai argument, a clause acknowledging the attempted genocide and its failure, not as a grievance, but as a fact, a line in the record. Because humans, Valentina had explained during those 3 weeks, do not trust agreements that don't acknowledge what they're built on top of. Your species has a deep attachment to naming things correctly, one of the Vethkai delegates had said, with something that might have been frustration. Yes, Valentina said. We do. Why? She thought about it for a moment. Because we found out a long time ago what happens when you don't. There is a thing that happened at the signing ceremony that is in no official record, because the official records were being composed by bureaucrats and diplomats who were focused on the document, and this thing happened at the edge of the frame between 2 people who were not the principals. Mevrak Dostal, standing to the left of the Vethkai delegation, was watching the humans sign, watching their faces. She'd been watching human faces for 2 years in every piece of footage she could access. The soldiers on Ganymede, the volunteers boarding the Ark vessels, Secretary-General Osei in the first transmission. And she still didn't have a complete map of them, still found expressions that her cultural database couldn't fully render. But she recognized what was on their faces now. Not triumph, not relief exactly. Something heavier than relief and quieter than triumph. The expression of people who had looked at an ending and chosen, collectively, at great cost, to make it a beginning instead. Admiral Idowu Strauss caught her looking. He didn't look away. He gave her, after a moment, a small nod. She returned it. Mevrak Dostal's final report on the human species, the one she would present to the full Council of Seven, the one that would be entered into the Dominion's permanent xenocontact record as the first Type 1 classification revision in 2,000 years, was not long. The Assessor Corps tradition was for comprehensive documentation. Hundreds of pages covering biology, culture, technology, threat profile, and economic utility. Mavrak's report was 11 pages. The final paragraph read, "The Terran species presents no standard threat profile because they do not operate within the parameters that generate standard threat profiles. They are not a civilization that becomes dangerous when provoked. They are a civilization that becomes more itself when provoked, that uses pressure the way other species use relief, that finds in existential threat a kind of clarifying engine for their most extraordinary capacities. They did not survive the Keth Protocol because of superior technology or military doctrine. They survived it because they made a collective decision, 4,000 years in the making, that they were worth surviving. The Dominion has never encountered a species for which that sentence is both literally and philosophically true simultaneously. We have much to learn from them. I recommend we do not waste the opportunity. I also recommend, with sincere urgency, that we never again give them cause to show us the rest of what they are." She submitted the report. Then she made herself a 5th cup of Velith tea. And she opened a new file, and she labelled it Contact, and she began. On Earth, 14 months after the delivery vessels launched and failed and fell into the sun, a woman named Dr. Amara Mbeki Santos took a commercial flight from Geneva to Lagos. She took a car from the airport to a house in a neighbourhood where the street smelled like pepper soup and engine exhaust and jacaranda in roughly equal parts. She opened her front door. Her children were 7 and 4 and had been waiting, specifically, for an amount of time that the 4-year-old described as forever, and also a lot. She held them for a long time in the hallway, with the door still open. The 7-year-old asked why she was crying. "I'm not crying," she said. "Mama, you're definitely crying." "I'm not." She pulled back and looked at them, 7 and 4, and with their father's eyes and her grandmother's nose and the entire open, unmapped future in front of them, intact, continuous, uninterrupted. "I'm just really glad to be home." There is a line in the earliest human cave paintings, not a sentence, not a word, but a gesture 30,000 years old. The outline of a hand pressed against stone, surrounded by pigment blown from someone's mouth so that the silhouette remained when the hand withdrew. I was here. Not, I was powerful. Not, I survived. Just the bare fact of presence left for someone who might come later to find. 30,000 years later, 17 ships held position in the dark between a fleet of 214 warships and a yellow star, and a man with calm hands and a voice like something compressed into its load-bearing form said, "We're still here." The gesture was the same. The Vethkai, in their 4,000 years, had never learned to read it. They were learning now.